The plane took off like any other red-eye flight. The passengers of Flight 708 settled into their seats, some dozing off, others watching movies or reading under dim cabin lights. It was supposed to be a routine overnight trip New York to London, nothing unusual. Somewhere over the Atlantic, a quiet tension began to spread through the cabin. It started with the flickering of the overhead lights, a small disturbance, easily dismissed. Then, the in-flight entertainment screens glitched, playing static before shutting off entirely. A few passengers murmured in annoyance, pressing their call buttons. The flight attendants, all maintaining professional smiles, reassured them it was just a temporary issue. But then came the announcement. The captain's voice, calm but strained, crackled through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are experiencing an unexpected delay in our arrival. Please remain seated and keep your seatbelts fastened." No explanation, just a vague assurance. A businessman in first class glanced at his watch, frowning. He had been on enough flights to know they should be approaching Heathrow soon. A woman near the back checked the time on her phone and whispered to her husband, "We should be landing in 10 minutes. But 10 minutes passed, then 20, then an hour. The plane continued flying. The flight attendants, who had previously moved through the aisles with effortless ease, now exchanged glances when they thought no one was looking. Passengers started whispering among themselves. A young man tried connecting to the in-flight Wi-Fi, but the network was gone. No service on his phone, either. No way to check their location. A baby began crying. An old woman clutched her husband's hand. Then, another announcement. The captain's voice was less steady this time. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are working to resolve a navigation issue. Rest assured, your safety is our priority." A navigation issue? That didn't make sense. Commercial flights didn't just lose their way. They had GPS, satellite guidance, air traffic control communicating with them at all times. Yet, as the passengers glanced out the windows, there was nothing but darkness. No city lights below, no ocean glimmering under the moon, just an endless, featureless black void. The businessman unbuckled his seat belt and stormed toward the galley. "I need to speak to the captain," he demanded. A flight attendant, her hands trembling slightly, blocked his way. "Sir, the cockpit is secure. Please return to your seat." He wasn't the only one growing impatient. A few others stood up, pressing for answers. Where were they? Why hadn't they landed? How could an entire plane be lost in the sky? A flight attendant finally cracked under the pressure, her voice hushed but urgent. "We can't contact the ground. No one is responding." Panic spread through the cabin like wildfire. Passengers reached for their phones, confirming what others had already discovered. No signal, no GPS, nothing. A flight that should have been tracked by hundreds of radar stations around the world had simply vanished. Hours passed. The plane did not descend. The fuel gauge should have been dropping rapidly, but if the pilots were worried about it, they didn't say. Then, for the first time, the cockpit door opened. The captain stepped out. He was an older man, silver hair neatly combed, his uniform crisp but his face was pale, eyes hollow. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse, as if he had been arguing with something unseen. "We have been in the air for over 12 hours, he said. "We should have run out of fuel long ago." The murmurs died instantly. Everyone stared at him. "We are not receiving transmissions from air traffic control. We have been flying in a straight line, but..." He hesitated, glancing toward the windows. "We don't know where we are." A heavy silence filled the cabin. The businessman, usually full of sharp words, sat down without another protest. The old woman crossed herself. Then, the turbulence began. The plane lurched violently, throwing drinks and personal belongings across the floor. Oxygen masks dangled uselessly from above as the aircraft shuddered. The passengers screamed, gripping their seats as if it would anchor them. Outside the windows, the darkness shifted. It was no longer empty. Shapes flickered in the void, impossible structures, moving in ways the mind couldn't comprehend. A low humming noise filled the cabin. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't human. It was something else entirely. A boy in the front row, no older than 10, suddenly spoke in a voice that wasn't his own. "We were never supposed to leave."
The captain rushed back into the cockpit, slamming the door shut behind him. The intercom crackled to life. But this time, it wasn't the captain's voice. It was something else. A voice layered with echoes, deep and hollow. "Return." The plane dropped. Not a normal descent, this was a free fall, like an invisible force had cut the engines. Passengers screamed, clutching at their seats, praying, crying. Then impact. Not a crash. Not an explosion. Just an instant stop. The plane stood still, mid-air, as if frozen in time. The outside world was gone. There was no sky, no earth, just an endless, swirling blackness. The lights flickered, and then everything reset. The plane was taxiing on the runway. The flight attendants were giving their safety demonstrations. The passengers sat quietly, adjusting their seatbelts, preparing for takeoff. The businessman glanced at his watch. The woman checked her phone. The young boy yawned, stretching his arms. None of them remembered. None of them realized they had already been on this flight before. Flight 708 took off into the night. And somewhere in the darkness, something waited.